Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Programming in Java. I'm your host, Trey, and today we're going to be talking about loops. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. So, what are loops? Well, in Java, loops control the flow of statements that allow you to execute a block of code repeatedly. There are three main types of loops. There is the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. And in this tutorial, we are going to discuss each of them extensively. So we have first the for loop, and we have a syntax of for, and then we have our initialization step, and then we have our condition, and then we have our update step. Then we enclose everything within these brackets here. So within everything, we have our code to be repeated, where the initialization process, we can call it as an integer, and then we can name it whatever identifier we call it, right? And then we can say integer is equal to 0 or 1 or whatever, or the number of times that you want to repeat it. And then we have our condition, which is I should be less than or I should be greater than something, right? And then we have our update, which is our increment, post increment or post decrement operators. Remember, I talked about this earlier on in the selections. So if you haven't, or if you don't know what increment or decrement operators are, I highly suggest you go check that video out. So the initialization step, before I get into any further details, you cannot declare this initialization step as anything other than an integer, or else you have an infinite loop. Just thought I'd tell you that in advance before I forget. So here's an example of our code using for loops, and then we say for int I is equal to 0. So we start at index 0 for whatever it is, and then we close the statement here, and then we say our operator, which is I should be less than 5, and then we close the statement as well, and then we increment this time every time this line of code is executed. This I will be incremented one time. So if this line is incremented like so, we'll have our first iteration, I love Java, and then this guy, the I, will be incremented, I will be equal to 1. And then I being 1, we'll have another point here, and then this guy will increment I to 2. And then we have this guy here, increment I to 3, and then this guy here, and then increment I to 4, which is there. So notice that we're starting from 0, so meaning our number of iterations are going to be 5. So meaning we can count from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is a total of 5, but never 5 itself, because we have put in the less than operator there. So this is the basic output for a for loop in Java. And next up, we're going to talk about what a while loop is. So the while loop is used for a number of iterations, or when the number of iterations is not known in advance, and the loop continues as long as a certain condition is true. So you can use a while loop to have a defined value, but when you want to execute a lot of code, like millions and millions of times, or maybe an infinite amount of times, you can use the while loop. So it has the following syntax: where while with opening parentheses in the conditions, and then you have the code to be repeated. And we can have something like this. Unlike for loops, you cannot declare I as an integer within the parentheses. Note to self, unlike for loops, you cannot declare I as an integer in the parentheses there, so you have to declare it outside. So we have int I, which is equal to 0, and then we close that, and then say while I is less than 5, repeat I love Java, right? And then we should have a increment operator inside the while loop, so that this loop continues on looping for the number of times that we want. So we can have while loop to Java, and then we'll have the same output here, right? So we also have this scenario where while can be true, right? We can put a true value there, and so long as this condition is true, print out system out the print line I love Java. And on your command terminal, you have I love Java going, and basically you have an infinite loop. So long as this value is true and you have not set any um, value that terminates the loop, it will continue going and going. So you can use Control C. This guy here, you can press Control together with C to end an infinite loop. So that's just something that you should be aware of. And then physical representation of how code is implemented using um, pseudocode is this type of representation there. So a while loop is implemented like so. You start from the beginning there and then you go down. So you have the condition here, right? If the condition is true, you execute the statements that are there, right? And then you update the increment value. So here we have our increment value, we have our statements. So if the condition is true, print out this guy. And if this guy is done, update the increment form, and it will go all the way up to here, and then we'll have a loop continuing to go until the condition becomes false. And when the condition becomes false, we see that this loop terminates, and then we end over there. So this is a basic representation of pseudocode with while loops. And for loops is something similar, but while loops, basically, this is how it is. So we also have something called a do-while loop, and the do-while loop is similar to the while loop, but it ensures that the block of code is executed at least once before the condition is checked after the loop body. So we have the syntax here, we have do, we open up our brackets there, and then we say code to be repeated, and then we have while the condition. So this is our syntax. And then our implementation here is going to be int I is equals to 0, do, and then that guy there, and then code to be repeated. We have iteration I, and then we have I plus plus, and then do this entire thingy, do this entire operation while I is less than 5. So long as I is less than 5, this will continue going and going and going and going and going, and so on and so forth, right? So this is just basic syntax for everything. And then we'll have our output here, which is iteration 0, iteration 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on and so forth. And then it will terminate when this is. So this is basically just a variation of the while loop. And that's basically everything to do with do while loops. So a few notes here. So make sure that the loop continuation condition eventually becomes false so that the loop terminates. If not, you will have an infinite loop. I think I stated this earlier on in the video. And if you don't have a condition that makes the statement false, this loop will continue and continue and continue. Also, a loop with wrong implementation will either give you a syntax error or an infinite loop, right? Like I said, you cannot declare a value or an increment value as a double. That is a terrible idea if you are trying to use loops for implementation. So you can stop the infinite loop by pressing, or you can just click together Control C at the same time using your command terminal, and the loop will immediately terminate. So here's an example of nested loops, right? So like I said, nested is just something within something within something. So nested loops consist of an outer loop and one or more inner loops, right? Each time an outer loop is repeated, the inner loops are re-entered and started anew. So we have this type of program here. I'm not gonna write this code. I'm not gonna show you the output of this code. This is basically your homework. You can just copy this, and then you can try it out. This is a basic multiplication table, and we can see that we have our name multiplication table there, and then we have our system auto print method there, and then we say for int j is equals to I. So this is our for loop, and with this for loop now we're going to say system.out.print. Make a space, and when we print j there. To display the table body, we have our loops here. We get int I is equal to 1. So we're starting our index from 1. And then we have I, which is less than 9. And then I plus plus. And the system does auto print line I. So it's going to start from 1 all the way up to 9, right? Notice that here we have less than or equal to. So it will either give us less than or 9, depending on the fact depending on the condition. But normally, when you say less than or equal to, you're basically saying 9 there, right? Okay, so the system will auto print I, so we're gonna have a value of 1 to 9, and we're going to have this type of character here that gives us some separation. And then we have for int j is equals to 1, and then j is also less than or equal to 9, j plus plus. So this is a loop within this loop, and then this value is going to say system.out of print line or printf. So this is another print method that is used for formatting, and it is used to decide the spacing between the characters that we have decided to. So for this iteration here, we're going to say this guy, 4 decimal places or 4 dimensions there, and then we're going to say I multiplied by j. So this is the type of syntax there, don't have to worry about it. And then after we're done with this loop, it is most important to always add a system.out of print line method here, or else you will have you won't have a program, or you won't have your output that is well organized. So you can feel free to write down this code, and you see the output and try to edit whatever you feel like editing. Just try to play around with the code. All right. So with that being said, we're gonna talk about methods in the next video. I hope this video helps you understand the difference between a while loop, a do while loop, and a for loop, and how these guys are implemented. So, like always, I always encourage try to play around with these things. That way, you'll be able to get a feel for programming. So, next video, we're gonna talk about methods. And for now, take care. Please like and subscribe, and stay blessed.